There is a specific kind of clarity that comes from having nothing. I do not mean the romanticized clarity of the ascetic who chooses poverty as a spiritual discipline. I mean the practical, unsentimental clarity that arrives when the usual financial structures of your life have been stripped away, when the savings are gone, the income is interrupted, the debts have accumulated, and you are standing at a point that most people spend enormous psychological energy trying never to reach: zero. The number that society teaches you to fear above most others in the economic domain. I want to talk honestly about what that position actually means and what it does not mean, because I think the conventional framing of financial ruin as catastrophe, as an endpoint, as a verdict on a person's worth and capacity is not just psychologically harmful, it is factually incorrect. Zero is not an endpoint, it is a coordinate. And like all coordinates, it describes your current position without determining your trajectory. The trajectory is the thing that matters. The trajectory is the thing that is entirely within your control to shape, regardless of what the number on your balance sheet currently reads. And understanding how to shape that trajectory, not through wishful thinking or vague encouragement, but through structural clarity about how value is created and accumulated in a modern economy, is what I want to work through carefully here. The first thing I want to address is the psychological weight of starting from zero, because if this weight is not examined directly, it will undermine every practical step that follows. Financial loss, whether from business failure, job loss, divorce, medical emergency, poor decisions, or simply the accumulated consequence of years of financial disorganization, does not merely affect your balance sheet. It affects your identity, your sense of competence, your relationship with risk, and your ability to think clearly about the future. These psychological effects are real, and they are important to understand because they tend to produce patterns of behavior that extend and deepen the financial difficulty rather than resolving it. The most common of these patterns is paralysis disguised as caution. The person who has lost significant financial ground tends to become intensely risk averse, not because they have rationally calculated that low risk strategies are now optimal, but because their emotional experience of loss has made risk itself feel unbearable. They hold cash when they should be building assets. They avoid opportunities because they fear further loss more than they desire potential gain. They defer decisions indefinitely, waiting for certainty that never arrives, because the last time they acted without certainty, the outcome was painful. This is understandable as a psychological response to loss. It is not useful as a financial strategy. In fact, it tends to produce exactly the extended stagnation it is designed to avoid. The second common pattern is compensatory impulsivity. Having experienced a slow accumulation of loss, some people swing in the opposite direction. They seek rapid recovery through high risk, high reward schemes, investments that promise extraordinary returns, business ventures entered without adequate preparation, financial decisions made on the basis of urgency and hope rather than careful analysis. This too is understandable. The desire to close the gap between where you are and where you need to be as quickly as possible is natural. But the urgency distorts judgment in ways that tend to compound the original loss rather than reversing it. Both of these patterns, paralysis and impulsivity, share a common root. They are responses to the emotional reality of financial loss rather than to the actual structural situation you are in. The beginning of genuine financial recovery is the capacity to separate the emotional experience of your current situation from the analytical assessment of it. This separation is not easy, and it does not happen automatically. It requires deliberate effort, the effort to look at your situation clearly without either the distortion of shame and despair or the distortion of compensatory optimism and urgency. What does the situation actually look like, assessed clearly? You have no financial assets or negative net worth. You have a certain set of capabilities, skills, knowledge, relationships, reputation that are not zero, even if your balance sheet is. You have time, not infinite time, but meaningful time if you are willing to use it deliberately. You have access to a modern economy that offers more pathways to genuine value creation than any economy in human history, and that increasingly rewards precisely the kinds of capabilities, knowledge, judgment, creativity, communication that are not capital intensive to develop. This is your actual situation, assessed without distortion in either direction. The starting point for rebuilding is not a financial decision, it is a conceptual one. It is the decision to understand clearly what wealth actually is, how it is actually built, and what the specific steps are that lead from your current position toward a genuinely different one. The conventional narratives about financial recovery, um, spend less than you earn, pay off your debts, build an emergency fund, are not wrong, but they are incomplete in a way that makes them insufficient as a framework for genuine wealth building. They describe the financial hygiene of not falling further behind. They do not describe the structural changes that lead to actually getting ahead. So let me be specific about what I mean by wealth, because precision here is essential. Wealth is not income. Wealth is not even high income. Wealth is the ownership of assets that generate value without requiring your constant personal labor. It is the condition in which your economic output is no longer primarily constrained by the number of hours you are willing and able to work. This is a categorically different condition from earning a good salary or maintaining a good credit score. And the path to it is categorically different from the paths that lead to those more conventional financial goals. The person rebuilding from zero has an unusual opportunity alongside their obvious difficulty. The opportunity is this: starting from zero means you have no legacy financial structure to preserve or defend. You have no existing portfolio allocation to reconsider, no existing debt structure to rationalize, no existing lifestyle commitments that constrain your options. You have the freedom, uncomfortable but real, to build from scratch according to the clearest possible understanding of how financial independence is actually achieved, rather than according to the incremental optimization of an existing structure that may have been built on flawed premises to begin with. Many people who eventually achieved genuine financial independence did so after a period of substantial loss. Not because loss is a prerequisite, it is not, and I would not romanticize it, but because the loss forced them to examine their assumptions about how economic life works, to discard the ones that were wrong, and to rebuild on a foundation that was more structurally sound. The loss was the occasion for the clarity. It was not pleasant. But the clarity proved more valuable than the loss was costly. So let us build that clarity from the beginning, because whether the loss came recently or long ago, and whether you are starting from zero by circumstance or by choice, the structural understanding is the same. The fundamental unit of economic life is not money, it is value. Value is the thing that money measures, and the accumulation of money, the accumulation of financial assets, is the consequence of consistently creating more value than you consume. This seems obvious when stated plainly, but its implications are frequently ignored in practice, especially in financial distress, when the focus tends to narrow entirely onto money, how to get more of it, how to stretch what you have, how to manage the flow between income and expenses. These are legitimate concerns, but they are downstream of the more important question: what genuine value can you create, for whom, in ways that scale beyond your personal time and effort? This question, what genuine value can I create, is the right starting question for anyone rebuilding from zero. Not, how do I find a job that pays more? Not, what investment will recover my losses? Not, how do I cut my expenses enough to start saving? These are all legitimate secondary questions, but they are answers to the wrong primary question. The right primary question is about value creation, because genuine, scalable value creation is the engine that makes all of the secondary financial mechanics meaningful. Let me work through what genuine value creation looks like as a practical matter, starting from zero in the actual economic environment we inhabit. The first and most important thing to understand is that the modern economy rewards leverage the ability to reach many people with a single effort in ways that have no historical precedent. The leverage of software allows a single person to build something that serves millions. The leverage of media allows a single voice to reach audiences that would have been unimaginable for any individual without institutional backing a generation ago. The leverage of networks allows a single node to connect productively with thousands of others without the geographic and logistical constraints that previously made such networks impossible. These leverage mechanisms are, for practical purposes, available to anyone with a device connected to the internet and the skills to use it productively. They do not require startup capital. They do not require institutional credentials. They do not require access to a physical location, a distribution network, or a regulatory license. They require knowledge, judgment, taste, and the discipline to produce genuinely useful things consistently over time. For a person starting from zero financially, this means that the primary constraint on wealth building is not capital, it is capability. and capability is something you can develop with time and effort regardless of your current balance sheet. This is not a naive claim. I am not suggesting that capability development is easy or fast, or that the absence of capital creates no real constraints. It does create constraints, and I will discuss those honestly. What I am saying is that in the current economic environment, capability is a more important input to wealth creation than capital for most people. And that starting from zero on the capital side is a far less disqualifying condition than it would have been in any prior era of economic history. The practical implication is that the first investment to make when rebuilding from zero is an investment in capability specifically, in developing the kind of specific knowledge that is genuinely rare, genuinely valuable to others, and genuine to your own experience and curiosity. Specific knowledge, as I use the term, is not formal credentials or professionally defined expertise, though it can include elements of both. It is the knowledge that emerges from the intersection of your genuine intellectual interests, your particular experiences, and the real problems you have actually wrestled with. It is the knowledge that is tacit in the sense that it cannot be fully taught in a classroom because it is partly embedded in judgment and pattern recognition that develops only through direct engagement with real problems over time. The person rebuilding from zero almost certainly has more specific knowledge than they recognize. The experience of financial difficulty itself is a form of specific knowledge, not the kind you would have chosen to acquire, but real nonetheless. The person who has navigated business failure, debt restructuring, or prolonged financial stress has acquired a visceral understanding of how financial systems actually work under pressure, how creditors and debtors negotiate in real conditions, how cash flow management feels when the margins are genuinely tight, how organizations behave when they are under financial strain. This understanding, combined with whatever domain expertise they had before the difficulty, is a foundation that is worth something. It is not nothing. The first practical step in rebuilding, therefore, is an honest inventory of your actual capabilities, not your credentials or your job titles, but your genuine knowledge and judgment in domains where you have actual experience, right? What problems have you solved? What situations have you navigated? What do you understand about specific domains that most people do not understand because you have actually been in them rather than merely reading about them? This inventory is more valuable than most people recognize at their lowest financial moment, partly because financial distress tends to suppress self-assessment across the board, and partly because the things, most deeply tend to feel obvious rather than distinctive, precisely because they are so deeply known. The inventory is not merely a psychological exercise. It is the beginning of a market analysis. For each area of genuine capability, the relevant question is, who needs this? Who would pay for it? How many of them are there? How can I reach them? These questions translate personal capability into market opportunity. And the answers, even preliminary, rough answers, begin to define the specific paths available to you from your current position. Now, let me be practical about the immediate financial reality of starting from zero, because the theoretical framework of capability development and specific knowledge, while important, does not feed you or pay your rent in the next 30 days. The immediate financial situation requires parallel management, generating enough income to survive and stabilize while simultaneously beginning to build the capabilities and structures that will lead to genuine wealth creation over longer time horizons. These are not incompatible activities, but they require different mental frameworks and different time allocations. And confusing them causes people to sacrifice the long-term building for short-term income management in ways that keep them trapped in a cycle of financial instability. The immediate income problem, the problem of having enough money to meet your current obligations, is best solved through the most direct application of your current capabilities to paying problems. This means doing work that produces income quickly, even if that work is not the work you ultimately want to be doing or the work that best reflects your specific knowledge. In the short term, income production is a survival function, and survival functions deserve to be solved efficiently and without excessive pride. If your specific knowledge is in a domain where income takes time to develop, if the path from capability to compensation requires building an audience or building a product or building a reputation over months or years, then you need a parallel source of income that can sustain you through that building period. The ability to manage these two timelines simultaneously, the short-term income timeline and the long-term wealth building timeline is one of the most practically important skills for anyone rebuilding from financial difficulty. It is difficult because the cognitive and emotional demands of financial survival are high, and they tend to crowd out the longer term thinking that wealth building requires. It is difficult because the work that produces immediate income is often not the work that builds long-term leverage. And the constant demand of immediate income can make the investment in long-term building feel like a luxury that cannot currently be afforded. This is a trap. The moment you stop investing in long-term capability building because the immediate income demands are too pressing, you commit yourself to a permanently reactive financial life, perpetually solving this month's problem, never getting far enough ahead to invest in the changes that would make next year's situation structurally different. The way out of this trap is not to eliminate the immediate income demands. They are real and must be met. The way out is to protect a portion of your time and attention, even a small portion, from the immediate income demands, and to use that protected time consistently for long-term capability building. This might mean 2 hours every evening, or a half day every weekend, or whatever configuration your specific circumstances allow. The quantity of time matters less than the consistency and the intentionality. 2 hours per day of genuine, focused investment in specific knowledge development compounds over 1 year into more than 700 hours. That is a significant investment. Over several years, it is transformative. The specific allocation of long-term building time depends on what you have identified as your most valuable specific knowledge and the most promising leverage mechanisms available to you. But in general terms, the long-term building activity should be oriented toward one of several things: developing a genuine body of work under your own name that demonstrates your specific knowledge and builds your reputation, building technical capability, particularly in software or content creation, that enables the permissionless leverage mechanisms available in the current economy, or developing relationships with people who are playing long-term positive sum games in domains relevant to your capabilities. Ideally, you are pursuing all three simultaneously because they compound in ways that reinforce each other. Let me discuss the relationship between debt and rebuilding, because debt is a reality for most people starting from zero, and it deserves careful treatment rather than the oversimplified advice it usually receives. The conventional advice about debt paid off as quickly as possible, starting with the highest interest rate, is financially sound as far as it goes. High interest debt is a drain on your productive capacity, and eliminating it releases resources for more productive uses. The mathematical case for prioritizing debt repayment is correct, but the conventional advice tends to treat debt repayment as the primary financial activity of a person in financial difficulty, to the exclusion of capability building and wealth creating investment. This can be a strategic error. A person who devotes every available resource to debt repayment for 5 years, at the end of that period, has less debt. They do not necessarily have more capability, more leverage, or more assets. They are financially cleaner, but not necessarily financially stronger. The distinction matters because financial strength, the ability to generate income, to build assets, to create value, is the thing that makes debt repayment sustainably possible, and that creates the conditions for genuine financial independence afterward. Pursuing debt elimination at the expense of capability building can produce a person who reaches zero debt in year 5 and finds themselves at the same income level and the same capabilities as in year 1, with no structural improvement in their underlying wealth building capacity. The more thoughtful approach is to manage debt intelligently while simultaneously building capability and beginning to create assets. This means being honest about which debts are genuinely urgent debts secured against essential assets, debts with immediate legal consequences, debts where the interest burden is genuinely impeding your ability to function financially, and prioritizing those while making minimum payments on others. It means not sacrificing investment in capability building for accelerated repayment of low interest debt when the return on capability investment is likely to significantly exceed the interest rate being avoided. And it means understanding that the goal is not a zero debt balance sheet followed by wealth building. The goal is a trajectory of increasing productivity and increasing asset creation from which debt can be progressively retired while the underlying wealth building capacity continues to develop. I want to talk about relationships and networks in the context of rebuilding from zero, because this is an area where the conventional financial rebuilding narrative is almost entirely silent and where the actual practical importance is very large. Your network, the web of relationships you have with other people who know your work, respect your judgment, and are engaged in productive activities is one of your most important economic assets. And it is an asset whose value does not appear on any balance sheet, but which has profound practical consequences for the opportunities available to you. For a person rebuilding from financial difficulty, the temptation is often to withdraw from professional and social relationships out of embarrassment or shame about their situation. This is understandable, and it is also strategically counterproductive. The people who know you and respect your capabilities are precisely the people who are most likely to offer opportunities, make introductions, provide referrals, or collaborate with you in ways that help you rebuild. Withdrawing from these relationships at exactly the moment when you most need them is a form of self-sabotage that is driven by pride rather than practical intelligence. The right approach is the opposite of withdrawal. Active, genuine, generous engagement with your existing network, combined with deliberate investment in expanding that network toward people who are operating in domains relevant to your specific knowledge and your building priorities. This means helping others without immediate expectation of return. It means sharing your genuine knowledge and perspective freely in contexts where others can benefit from it. It means being honest about your situation with people you genuinely trust, not to elicit sympathy, but because honesty enables more productive engagement than the exhausting performance of a financial success you do not currently have. It means seeking out and investing in relationships with people who are thoughtful, productive, and playing long-term games, because proximity to people with these qualities is itself a form of leverage. And because the relationships you build during difficult periods tend to be among the most durable and authentic of your professional life, the digital environment has made network building far more accessible than it was for previous generations rebuilding from financial difficulty, right? The ability to publish genuinely useful work under your own name, to write, to speak, to create, to contribute to conversations in your domain, and to have that work find an audience through the mechanisms of digital distribution means that building a reputation and expanding your network no longer requires physical proximity to centers of activity in your field or access to institutional gatekeepers. A person with genuine specific knowledge and the discipline to share it consistently can build meaningful professional visibility from anywhere on a timeline that is compressed compared to what was possible before the current digital infrastructure existed. This is particularly important for someone rebuilding from zero, because it means that reputation and network, two of the most important assets in long-term wealth creation, can be rebuilt in parallel with the financial rebuilding, using primarily time and intellectual effort rather than capital. The body of work you begin building today, the essays, the projects, the contributions to communities in your domain, is an asset that starts compounding from the day you start creating it. 5 years from now, that body of work will be a meaningful asset in ways that would be impossible to fully anticipate today. Let me address the question of what to build specifically. What kind of asset or enterprise a person rebuilding from zero should focus on creating? The answer is highly individual. And I want to resist the temptation to prescribe specific categories, because the right answer depends on your specific knowledge, your available leverage mechanisms, your existing relationships, and a range of other factors that are unique to your situation. What I can offer is a framework for thinking about the question. The framework begins with the intersection of three things: what you know deeply and authentically, what other people genuinely need and will pay for, and what mechanisms of leverage are available to you given your current capabilities and constraints. The ideal building activity sits at the center of this intersection. It draws on your genuine specific knowledge, it addresses a genuine market need, and it can be delivered through some form of leverage that allows it to reach more people than your personal time would allow. For many people, the first practical asset to build when starting from zero is a body of demonstrated work in their area of specific knowledge. This could take many forms: writing that demonstrates genuine expertise, software tools that solve real problems, educational content that genuinely teaches something valuable, advisory relationships in which your judgment is genuinely useful to others. The common thread is that the work is genuinely good, that it actually delivers value to the people who encounter it, and that it is done under your own name in ways that build your reputation over time. The discipline of doing genuinely good work under your own name consistently over time is one of the most reliable wealth building activities available to anyone, regardless of their starting financial position. It does not require capital. It does not require institutional support. It requires intellectual honesty, the willingness to produce work that is actually as good as you can make it, rather than work that is merely adequate. And it requires patience, because the compounding of reputation through demonstrated quality is a slow process in the early stages and a fast one in the later stages. The patience required here is worth examining directly because it is psychologically demanding in ways that are easy to underestimate. When you are starting from zero, the urgency of your financial situation is real and constant. The income from a long-term building activity, from developing specific knowledge, building a body of work, creating software or content that can eventually reach large audiences, does not arrive quickly. In the early months and often in the early years, the visible output of your long-term building investment is modest, and the financial return is either absent or far below what you need. The natural response to this is to doubt the strategy, to wonder whether the long-term building approach is actually going to work, or whether you should redirect all your effort toward whatever pays most immediately. This doubt is rational in isolation and dangerous in aggregate. It is rational because the uncertainty is real. You cannot know in advance exactly how the specific knowledge you are building will generate income, or on exactly what timeline. The uncertainty is genuine, and pretending it is not would be dishonest. But the doubt is dangerous because acting on it, abandoning the long-term building in favor of pure short-term income maximization, removes you from the only trajectory that leads to genuine financial independence. You can solve today's problem at the cost of next year's opportunity. And if you do this consistently, you will solve an indefinite series of today's problems without ever creating the structural change that makes tomorrow's situation different from today's. The resolution of this tension is not to deny the short-term urgency or to pretend it does not exist. The resolution is to manage both timelines in parallel to meet the short-term income requirements through the most efficient available means, while protecting a portion of your time and energy for the long-term building, regardless of what the short-term situation is. This is easier to describe than to execute, especially in periods of genuine financial pressure. But it is the only approach that leads to a different structural situation over meaningful time horizons. There is a particular kind of courage required for this parallel management, and it is worth naming clearly. It is the courage to invest in yourself, in your own capability development, in your own body of work, in your own specific knowledge during a period when the return on that investment is uncertain and deferred, while the immediate demands of survival are pressing and concrete. This is the hardest kind of investment to make. Not because the amounts required are large, they're mostly investments of time and attention rather than capital, but because the emotional environment makes long-term thinking genuinely difficult. Financial distress narrows attention toward immediate problems in ways that are cognitively and emotionally real. And extending your attention horizon beyond the immediate situation requires a deliberate effort that does not always feel available. The deliberate practices that support this extension of time horizon are worth identifying. The first is the maintenance of some form of regular reflection, daily, weekly, or some other consistent frequency in which you review not only your immediate financial situation, but your longer term trajectory. What are you building? What progress, however modest, are you making on the long-term building activities? What have you learned in the past period that has deepened your specific knowledge or broadened your capabilities? This reflective practice is not merely psychological. It maintains the cognitive visibility of the long-term trajectory at a time when immediate pressures would otherwise crowd it out of awareness. The second practice is deliberate association with people who are themselves engaged in long-term building rather than purely short-term income maximization. The people you spend time with shape your time horizon as much as any deliberate cognitive practice. A person who spends all of their time with people who are focused purely on immediate income and survival will find that their own thinking gravitates toward the same horizon. A person who also spends time, even modest amounts of time, with people who are genuinely building long-term assets, pursuing genuine specific knowledge development, and thinking about leverage and ownership will find that their own thinking extends further into the future than it otherwise would. You do not need to abandon relationships with people in difficult circumstances. You need to add relationships with people who are thinking and operating at the time horizon you are aspiring to. The third practice is the consistent creation of some output, however modest in the long term building. Direction, writing an essay, completing a small software project, recording a conversation, contributing genuinely useful analysis to a discussion in your domain. The act of creation, consistently maintained even at a small scale, does several things simultaneously. It maintains your skills and develops them further. It creates tangible evidence of your capability that can be seen and evaluated by others, and it maintains the psychological reality of the long-term building trajectory in your own mind. The person who has created nothing in the past 3 months, regardless of what circumstances caused that gap, feels further from their long-term goals than they need to. The person who has created something, even something small, every week, maintains a connection to their longer term trajectory that is not merely psychological but actual. I want to turn now to a specific question that I think is practically important and often mishandled in the financial rebuilding context, the question of income sources and their relationship to long term building. Most financial advice treats income as a single category. You either have enough or you do not, and the goal is to maximize it. The framework I'm describing treats income differently as a portfolio of sources, each with different characteristics in terms of immediate yield, scalability, leverage, and alignment with long-term wealth creation. Employment income, a salary or hourly wage, is high immediacy and low scalability. It arrives reliably and requires ongoing labor. It is an appropriate primary income source during the rebuilding period precisely because it is reliable, but it should be understood as a survival mechanism rather than a wealth building mechanism, and it should not consume so much time and energy that it forecloses long-term building activities. Freelance or consulting income payment for specific expertise applied to specific problems for specific clients has intermediate characteristics. It is more immediately available than asset income, but more scalable than pure employment because the rate you can charge is constrained only by the demonstrated value of your specific knowledge rather than by a salary negotiation. Developing a freelance income stream around your specific knowledge is often a meaningful intermediate step in the rebuilding trajectory. It generates income at a rate that rewards genuine capability rather than merely your time. It maintains your skills and deepens your domain knowledge through practical application. It builds your reputation and network with people who have paid for your work and can testify to its quality. And it provides a form of income that is partially decoupled from the employment structure's inherent constraints on upside. Asset income revenue from products, content, software, or other assets that generate returns without requiring ongoing proportional labor is low immediacy and high scalability. It takes time to build and initially generates modest returns, but it has the fundamental property of not requiring your continued presence to produce revenue. The development of asset income streams, even very small ones initially, is the beginning of the structural transformation from income dependence to wealth ownership. The first dollar generated by an asset you have created is categorically different from the first dollar generated by an hour of your labor, even if the amounts are identical. It represents the beginning of decoupling. The trajectory I am describing is not a clean linear progression. It is a messy, iterative process in which employment income provides stability during an early period. Freelance income begins to develop as specific knowledge deepens and reputation grows, and asset creation begins in parallel, slowly at first, generating modest returns that gradually increase as the assets develop and the audience or user base grows. At some point, usually further along the timeline than optimism would suggest, the asset income begins to meaningfully supplement the employment and freelance income. At a later point, it becomes a primary income source. At a still later point, if the assets are well chosen and the leverage is real, it produces more income than your prior employment ever did, with far less constraint on your time and attention. This trajectory is available from zero. It does not require a starting balance. It requires capability, patience, consistent effort in the right directions, and the intellectual clarity to understand what you are building and why. The clarity is the foundation. Without it, you are likely to make the common mistakes. prioritizing short-term income at the expense of long-term building, accumulating debt in the name of investment without genuine leverage behind the investment, rebuilding a conventional employment-dependent financial life that is stable but not structurally different from the one that preceded your difficulty. With it, you make different decisions, organize your time differently, and build toward a different destination. Let me address the role of financial habits in this rebuilding framework, because habits are the operational layer through which strategic clarity either translates into real outcomes or fails to. The strategic understanding of leverage, specific knowledge, and asset creation is necessary but not sufficient. It must be operationalized through consistent daily behavior, and consistent daily behavior requires habits that are stable enough to be maintained under the stress of financial uncertainty. The most important financial habit for someone rebuilding from zero is what I would describe as the habit of measurement. Not obsessive tracking that creates anxiety, but regular, honest awareness of the key metrics of your financial situation: your income from each source, your essential expenses, your debt obligations, your progress on long-term building activities. The measurement is not the goal is the trajectory, but measurement makes the trajectory visible, and visibility enables the small course corrections that prevent small deviations from becoming large ones. The second critical habit is the habit of protection, specifically protecting a proportion of your income from consumption before it is available for consumption. The conventional formulation of this is pay yourself first, meaning that you allocate savings or investment before you allow consumption to absorb all available income. The deeper rationale is that financial stability requires creating a gap between income and consumption that persists through periods of income variability. Without this gap, every unexpected expense becomes a crisis, and the constant management of crises prevents the long-term building that is the only path out of the cycle. The third habit, perhaps the most intellectually important, is what I would call the habit of asymmetric thinking about time. This means consistently and deliberately distinguishing between decisions whose consequences are primarily short-term and decisions whose consequences extend significantly into the future. The former can be made with a relatively less deliberation. The tactical management of immediate situations can often be handled competently without extensive analysis. The latter deserve far more deliberate attention than they typically receive. Decisions about which skills to develop, which relationships to invest in, which building activities to pursue, which income sources to cultivate. These decisions compound in both directions over time. A decision that seems minor in the moment, whether to spend your evening in a way that maintains momentum on a long-term building project or in a way that simply provides rest and immediate gratification, has consequences that, repeated over years, determine the trajectory of your financial life. I want to close with a reflection on what financial rebuilding from zero actually is at its deepest level, because I think the conventional framing as recovery, as repair, as return to a prior state is less useful than a different framing. Financial rebuilding from zero is not recovery, it is redesign. The prior financial life, whatever it looked like, led to where you are. Rebuilding it in its prior form would lead, by the same structural logic, to similar fragility and similar vulnerability to disruption. The opportunity that zero provides, and it is a genuine opportunity, however unwelcome its arrival, is the opportunity to build something fundamentally different, not incrementally better than what preceded it. Structurally different. Structurally different means built around genuine specific knowledge rather than tradable generic skills. Built around leverage mechanisms, code, media, networks, ownership, rather than exclusively around the trading of time for money. Built around a long time horizon and the patient compounding of capability and reputation rather than around the maximization of immediate income. Built around positive sum relationships with people who are genuinely trying to create value rather than around transactional relationships whose depth extends only as far as the immediate transaction. Built around the genuine understanding of what wealth is and how it is created, rather than around the conventional financial narratives that produce comfortable but financially constrained lives. This redesign is not instantaneous. It does not produce immediate results that are visible in the standard financial metrics. It produces results over years and decades that are dramatically different from what the conventional trajectory, employment, incremental savings, gradual debt reduction, modest retirement produces. The gap between the two outcomes compounds over time in the same way that interest compounds on financial assets. The person who begins building the structurally different life today from wherever they currently stand will find 10 years from now that the distance between their current financial reality and the modal outcome for people who made conventional choices is far larger than it would have seemed possible from today's starting point. Zero is a starting point. It is not a comfortable one. It is not one you would have chosen if the choice had been available. But it is a starting point from which a genuinely different financial life is more possible than from a position of moderate financial comfort, precisely because moderate financial comfort discourages the restructuring that genuine independence requires. The discomfort of zero, honestly faced, is a more reliable catalyst for that restructuring than the comfort of just enough. This is not a comforting thought in the ordinary sense, but it is, I think, a true one. And truth, in the end, is the most useful starting material for building anything that lasts. The work begins where you are. The direction is clear. The timeline is longer than urgency suggests and shorter than despair implies. The compounding starts when you start. There is no better time than now to build something that will be unrecognizable in its growth from what exists today, but that is recognizably and entirely yours, built from your genuine specific knowledge, delivered through genuine leverage, sustained by genuine patience, and owned entirely by you in the only way that produces genuine financial independence. Not as income, which stops when you stop, but as wealth, which grows while you sleep and persists long after the memory of the zero you started from has become a story you tell to explain how you got here.